What's that? Can't stop laughing. Moment where you're in a situation you shouldn't be laughing. I heard a kid fart in church during a wedding. I had to remove myself because I couldn't get it under control. It was one of those loud echo of the old wooden pew farts. I was at church for my grandfather's 5th year death anniversary and the guy singing was so bad my grandma and me were almost died from laughter. Edit. It was more of a memorial than an anniversary. Back in 2004, I was at my cousin's funeral. And my aunt was in such a shocked state. She couldn't stop laughing. She was known to do this at funerals. Because laughing is contagious. I also started laughing a little bit. And I had to go to the back of the church. And to the bathroom to get it out of me. There's a scene in The Pianist. Which is about the Holocaust. Where a woman is shot in the street and her body folds in on itself as she falls to the ground. We watched that movie in sophomore year English class after reading the book Night by Elie Wiesel. It was completely silent in the classroom during virtually the whole film. But at that part in particular, some kid piped up from the back of the class. Into the silence. With this sad, disappointed tone in his voice. Like he just found out the lunch lady was out of chicken nuggets. Oh. She folded. So many of us busted out laughing and it was completely inappropriate and I could not help it at all. The teacher was not pleased. My grandparents, both sets, insisted on burying my parents as Catholic for their funeral. Little did they know, my parents hadn't been practicing the religion since they moved out of their parents' home. They hired a lady who was singing off-tune Catholic songs so loud into the microphone that it felt like a drunk karaoke concert. Everyone probably thought I was shaking from crying in the front row by myself, but I was literally laughing so goddamn hard I had tears streaming down my face. I had to practically choke myself to keep the giggles from coming out. I could just imagine my parents next to me going WTF is this? And laughing with me. It was a very inappropriate time to laugh, but that dang lady got the best of me. With a group of friends talking about random shit. After a while the topic of Alzheimer's disease comes up and a friend comments that his grandmother died of Alzheimer's. Another friend goes, "Didn't know you could die of Alzheimer's. Always thought you died of the complications." And then another friend casually blurts, "Maybe she just forgot she was alive." I had to leave the room because I was crying from laughing. Not me, but my friend. She was getting fired from her job. And all she could think about was, what'll it be fellas? Mustard. Or ketchup. From the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. My mother and father went to a funeral of one of mother's aunts that she was not close to. In fact, my father had never met her. As they stood at the open casket, my father said to my mother, "She just doesn't look like herself." Again, my father had never seen the aunt before. For whatever reason this struck my mother as very funny and she started laughing. She held her hands to her face and ran from the casket. Her sisters saw this and thought she distraught and followed her out to console her. Where my mother had to explain that she was laughing and not crying and why. She was so pissed at my father it was hilarious. I had this really nice but really awkward physics teacher in high school. He was a large nerdy man but spoke with a lisp and a very soft voice. Imagine the guy from Office Space asking for his stapler. That's how he sounded. One day he is giving his lesson and mid-sentence he goes from this voice to what sounded like Satan himself. "Okay class please." Deep hell voice. "Take out your books." Cough cough excuse me, must have something in my throat. Then continued like nothing happened. I could not, for the life of me, stop fucking laughing and I was the only fucking one. It was the most bizarre and fucking hilarious thing I had ever seen. I had to walk out of the class to catch my composure. This was at least 15 years ago now and I'll never forget it. At a funeral, the pastor kept referring to God as the Great Comforter. And all I could think of was a tacky bedspread glowing with holy light. Every time he said it my giggles got worse to the point I had to pretend I was crying really hard and left to hide in the bathroom. Visiting my grandmother's grave with my grandfather for the first time a few years ago. Expected tears and a solemn day. Instead we passed a grave marked Wanda. And my grandfather said, "Well, I wonder what killed her?" None of us could stop laughing. My grandmother would have loved it. My friends from college and I are still super close even 15 years later. There's an inside joke involving giving people a specific fake name that we always laugh about when we get together. Last week one of these friends tried to kill himself. We'll call him John. John's brother. Another of the close friends. Called me and told me that John had tried to kill himself and that he was at the hospital. Then he tells me that when asked for identification at the scene of the suicide attempt, John gave the paramedics the fake name from college. As sad as I was about what had happened, I bust out laughing so hard when he told me. I couldn't help it. I'm laughing now even thinking about it. All of the other members of the group had the same reaction when John's brother called them. All of them. We've got lake of fireside property in hell. Cheers. Held up a cadaver's arm. Forgot the arm was detached to the body. Raised it up. Wondered why it was loose. Panicked that I detached it. Dropped it on the floor and thought the professor was gonna be mad. Hid the arm under the gurney. While the professor was staring at me 0.5 emperors behind, I turned around. Looked at her and laid. Worst moment ever. IDK if there's a name for it. But when I get really nervous or scared, I start to laugh. Like, if it's bad enough, you'd think I was watching the best scene in the best Three Stooges skit ever made. So I was driving down the interstate when I saw a deer bolt across. It got hit by a car in the oncoming lane. Flew like a rag doll in front of my 18-wheeler. And exploded. IDK what happened? There was just blood everywhere. It looked like I'd gone on a rampage in GTA. But with blood physics from Mortal Kombat. I pulled over to inspect the damage. Just blood and bits of flesh everywhere. And a cracked and bent grill. I got lucky. So I filled out a report with my company. And took off for a shop to see about fixing the grill. And hopefully a truck wash. And wouldn't you know, there's an open way station just ahead. The DOT officer came out to see me as soon as I was in sight. And waved me over to the inspection area. He immediately starts laying into me about why the hell the front of my truck is covered in blood. And I am just laughing. I mean, I couldn't get a single word out. Every time I tried to say something, I got a few words out. And just burst out laughing. Finally his partner starts inspecting the truck. And finds a piece of a hoof. I slowly managed to calm down enough to talk. And we got it all sorted. Luckily the DOT officer was having a good day. Because he decided not to write me a ticket, and let me use their water hose they had on site to wash most of it off before I took it to a shop to repair the grill. Edit. I'm not a lawyer. So I can't quote chapter and verse. But some people are asking. So here's an answer. Some states have weird laws protecting wildlife. So if you hit them, you can be fined. I'm pretty sure this for specific animals like eagles. But I also have an ongoing fear of getting tickets every time I get inspected. So that was more of something I was relieved did not happen. In school we did a course on mythology and had a project where we had to write our own mythological stories for the creation of creatures, places, etc. One kid wrote a story about how a man was abusing his horse. So the gods cursed him. One day his horse threw him onto a spear which went through the back of his head and out of his forehead, and he transformed into the first unicorn. I couldn't fucking stop laughing for a solid 5 minutes. The teacher berated me for laughing at violence, but the kid and I both thought that was funny as shit. My father's funeral. My daughter was 3 months old and have a lot of belly pain. She farted so loudly that the priest needed to stop talking for us to stop laughing. He even told us that the church was a serious place. And if we couldn't behave to get out. I told him the deceased was my father. And I couldn't control my daughter's farts. When I was a second-year law student, I had a classmate abruptly get up, mid-lecture, and waddled quickly out of the lecture hall. There were about 90 students in the lecture and, in law school, the academic approach is the Socratic method, which is usually the professor and one student going one during the course of a lecture class. The dude comes back into the classroom and the professor abruptly halts his current line of questioning with another student. I'm front of the class. The professor asks the returning student, "Is everything okay?" The student responds, "Bad Chipotle," and walked back to his seat. I spent the rest of the lecture period giggling through the professor grilling students about family law. TLDR, a classmate in law school has an explosive bout with Chipotle that made him duck run to the bathroom in the middle of a lecture. Was sat at dinner with friends this week and one of the kiddos was saying they had extra stomachs for some particular food. Started talking about how cows had extra stomachs. Then somehow it got to comparing humans and cows and one of them said in the brightest, most angelic voice, "But mum doesn't have udders." I made the mistake of glancing at her husband and I swear the filthy twinkle in his eye was audible. Thank fuck I have long hair. I dropped my head down to look at my plate, so my hair covered my expression and sat there with my shoulders shaking silently. He asked in a rather amused voice if I was okay as I appeared to be vibrating. Couldn't fucking breathe. Used to be a member of student council back in college, and this one time during a meeting with the campus dean who was explaining very seriously how some students were shitting on the toilet walls and throwing literal shit on the toilet ceilings, which were building up expenses for cleaning. Was asked to give ideas on how to tackle the issue, and I clearly remember trying not to laugh and holding it in perfectly, but then as I made eye contact with a friend of mine in the council, we bursted out laughing to the point where our stomachs started to hurt, which led to other members of the council laughing out loud. It was the first time meeting the campus dean as well. After that, anytime I'd see him he'd give me a dirty look.